Thanks very much for staying with us. Time now for Eye on Africa with me, Georgia Calvin-Smith. Tonight at the G5 Sahel Summit, France pledges 220 more troops to battle extremist cells operating in the Sahel. 5 West African nations agree to work more closely together over security, even as the US considers pulling out of the region. Also, Russian and Turkish mediators in Libya's brutal conflict say that warring sides have made some progress, but only the delegation from the Tripoli-based government has signed a fragile ceasefire. Their rivals from the east say that they need more time. And farmers hidden away in the backwaters of Casamance in Senegal grow a secret crop. Locals say that the only way that they can get by is by growing cannabis. But first, Niger began 3 days of national mourning on Monday for soldiers killed last week in an extremist attack. The numbers of fatalities from the raid on the Chinagrodo post has jumped dramatically from the 25 initially reported by the state to 89. It's now the most deadly attack of its kind in Niger for years. Jihadists operating in the region appear to be growing increasingly daring. President Issoufou Mahamadou's fired the army's chief of staff over the 174 members of the security forces who've been killed in the country since December. Now, Mahamadou, along with the leaders of Mali, Burkina Faso, Chad and Mauritania, were in the southern French city of Pau on Monday as French President Emmanuel Macron opened a summit aimed at shoring up the fight against extremism in West Africa. France currently has about 4,500 troops deployed to this end across the Sahel. Monday's meeting started with heads of state paying tribute to 13 French soldiers killed in Mali last November. And an uncomfortable question from Macron about whether French troops are still wanted on the continent. Armin Georgian tells us more.
The line that came out of this final press conference between President Macron and the African leaders here was that we're all in this together, that it's important for French forces to continue their work, but equally important to increase the capacities of local security forces as well. So they didn't want to kind of give the impression that there were kind of distinctions in the overall goals here. Of course, on the question of anti-French sentiment, well, President Macron got a resounding reply to that from the other leaders here. They did sign on to a very clear pledge to support continuing French presence, and he was also thanking the African leaders here for what he said was their condemnation of that anti-French sentiment. But yes, of course, there is an overarching strategic imperative here, which is that everybody has to work together to try to sort out this problem in the Sahel.
So everyone working together sounds like a great ideal, but what has come concretely out of the summit? Anything likely to have any measurable effect on the current strategy in the region?
There are some concrete things on the military front. Firstly, they've all agreed to set up a joint command to deal with jihadists in specific areas, actually in a very large, it has to be said, border area, Liptako-Gourma, which stretches between Mali, Niger and Burkina Faso. This is the area where the French are going to increase their troop numbers. They'll add another 220, and they also want to integrate the G5 military force into that same commando structure, basically to have much better coordination and hopefully to have more effective attacks on jihadists. Obviously, we don't know how effective that's going to be. We'll have to see in the coming months.
So beyond what France is pledging, do you get the sense that the Sahel nations are happy with the overall international support that they're currently getting in tackling extremist instability in the region?
Well, I mean, I got the sense from the president of Burkina, who spoke quite at length here, that he's grateful that this summit has kind of focused on the area that everyone should concentrate on in terms of security, and also on who the actual threat is. So everybody here was agreeing that their priority has to be the fight against the Islamic State in the Greater Sahara. That doesn't mean they won't attack other groups, but IG GS is the top priority now. So I think Kabore was pretty grateful for that. But I think there's been a gap between what some of these African leaders were saying before the summit, which were a bit hostile in a way to the international community. I mean, for example, the president of Niger had been saying the international community is dragging its feet and we don't understand why. There were much more tame, or at least warmer comments here in Pau, praising various actors in the international community, particularly the Europeans who were represented at this summit. And there were thanks from the Sahel leaders to them in respect of various Franco-German initiatives which are aimed to improve the training of local security forces and also improving development aid. But again, of course, Georgia, will have to see in the coming months whether all this remains fine words or whether it will translate into a kind of renewed political will and more money and more action on the ground. The next kind of point at which to take stock of all that is going to be the G5 Sahel plus France summit in Nouakchott in Mauritania in June 2020.
Armin Georgian there for us in Pau. Now, after hours of negotiations, the two warring sides at the heart of Libya's current instability failed to settle on a ceasefire on Monday. Although the UN-recognised government of Prime Minister Fayez al-Sarraj has signed a document tentatively settled on over the weekend, General Khalifa Haftar, whose forces have been besieging Tripoli since last April, are still asking for more time. Nicolas Chemin tells us more.
Fayez Sarraj, the head of Libya's UN-recognised government, and his rival Khalifa Haftar, who heads the eastern-based army, were both in Moscow on Monday, but they did not meet. They held indirect talks mediated by Russia and Turkey.
Some progress has been made. Mr. Sarraj signed the document. Marshal Haftar asked for some more time to consider the matter. He will wait until Tuesday morning before deciding to sign or not. I hope he will sign it.
On the ground, Haftar is supported by Russia, Egypt, the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia. France does not officially support him, but has been accused of being too close to him. Turkey, Italy and Qatar are backing Sarraj. Monday's talks showed once again that Moscow and Ankara are key players in oil-rich Libya.
Sarraj and Haftar both said they would comply with the call for a ceasefire. We'll continue to work with Russia to maintain the ceasefire and accelerate the political process.
Haftar's troops have been fighting since April to try and seize Tripoli from the UN-recognized government. After these talks in Moscow, Germany said it would hold another Libya peace summit in Berlin. It did not give a specific date, but said the plan was to organize it this month.
Look now at some news in brief. At least 3 people were killed in eastern Kenya in an attack by al-Shabaab early on Monday. The raid was the 5th by the extremists in just under 2 weeks. Militants crossed over from Somalia into Kamunte town in Harissa County. All the victims were non-Muslim teachers. One Muslim teacher was reported as having been kidnapped. Al-Shabaab's regularly targeted Kenya in revenge for sending troops into Somalia to fight the militants in 2011. In Guinea, at least 2 young people were killed and several protesters arrested in and around Conakry on Monday. Gunshots rang out throughout the capital as demonstrators burned tires and blocked roads during rallies against President Alpha Conde's bid for a 3rd term in office. Opposition groups have threatened to boycott next month's legislative elections if 81-year-old Condé doesn't pull plans for a constitutional referendum. He's hoping that could allow him to run again after his current term ends this December. And China's foreign minister wrapped up a 5-nation tour of Africa with a call for an end of international sanctions against Zimbabwe. Meeting with the country's president, Emerson Mnangagwa, Minister Wang Yi accused the US and the EU of waging a Cold War against Zimbabwe, with more than 2 decades of penalties that were initially brought in over alleged human rights abuses. China is Zimbabwe's biggest source of foreign direct investment. Wang Yi's tour was to further promote Beijing's economic and political interests on the continent. Now, farmers in a remote Senegalese backwater say that even though that they would like to grow other crops, A lack of investment in their communities means that they can only make enough to get by growing cannabis. Cuba's 200 or so residents are hidden away in the secluded area of Casamance where police seldom go. Have a look.
The journey to the southern Senegalese village of Cuba is long and arduous. Sheltered by mangrove swamps, locals say that no police officer has set foot here since the 1980s. Only in places as remote as this can farmers get away with flaunting Senegal's crackdown on the cultivation of cannabis. In places like this, the production of marijuana thrives. The village's seclusion means that tourism and conventional agriculture are rarely seen as viable industries. So the marijuana plantations have turned out to be a blessing. Thanks to the industry, many growers have built better lives than they otherwise would have.
Ever since I was a baby, people have been growing cannabis. That's what our economy is. That's what people use to help send their kids to school. If you're not growing it, you'll never get out.
The harvest is carefully packed up to be sold to traffickers who arrive by canoe. It can sell at anywhere between 23 to 45 euros per kilo, a fortune in comparison with legal crops such as onions. But that profit comes with a hefty risk. Growers, sellers and consumers face up to 10 years in prison if caught. And in 2018, an agreement was signed with neighbouring country, the Gambia, to tighten up checks on the border. But despite all this, the mayor of the rural commune that Cuba is part of believes that the growers in the village can rest easy for the time being.
It's easy for law enforcement to target production here, to get access here. But with the islands, access is very difficult, so illegal crops develop in these hard-to-reach areas.
Locals will be hoping that they can hold on to their livelihood. To do so, they will have to continue to fly under the radar, as Senegal is showing no signs of joining Zimbabwe, Lesotho and others in the list of African nations to have legalised cannabis.
Well, that's it for Eye on Africa for now. Thanks very much for joining us, and do so again if you can. Take care.